I pulled my SUV into the circular cul-de-sac of Willow Creek, HOA tires crunching over the fresh December snow like bones under a boot. The 4-hour drive from Seattle had my shoulders knotted tighter than Karen Ellison's ridiculous no visible Christmas lights before December 1st rule, but that wasn't what twisted my stomach into a fist. The neighborhood looked flawless as always. Every lawn mowed to the exact 3.5 inches mandated by Section 4.2 of the covenants. White lights synchronized across every roofline like soldiers on parade, not a single colored bulb daring to offend the community aesthetic. Picture perfect. Deceptively perfect. The community clubhouse door stood propped open with the same plastic wreath Karen had approved last year after fining 3 families for using real pine. I paused in the entry, listening to the clink of plastic forks on paper plates, the forced laughter, the low hum of neighbors pretending they love each other. For a second, I was 12 again, breathless with the hope that this year might be different. Anyone still accepting contributions? I called out, unwrapping my scarf. The chatter in the main hall died like someone had yanked the plug on a speaker. I stepped forward, boots echoing on the polished tile that Karen insisted we pay extra dues to keep spotless. The archway framed the scene that froze the blood in my veins despite the roaring gas fireplace. 12 long tables set for the potluck. 12 reserved spots for key contributors. 12 crystal-look plastic goblets catching the LED twinkle lights. But none of them had my name card anymore. Karen looked up from the head table, her half-smile sharp enough to cut glass. My former neighbor, 55 now, but still wearing the same pearl necklace and superiority complex she'd had when she first ran for president on the promise of restoring order. Well, if it isn't Isabel Reed finally deciding to grace us with her presence, she said, adjusting her clipboard like it was the nuclear codes. Your usual spinach dip spot is out back with the compost bins, dear. We had to make room for actual contributors this year. Her husband didn't even glance up. My mother's old friend Linda whispered to the woman beside her, I thought you said she wasn't coming anymore. Karen's new favorite, the young influencer who just moved in and already had her lawn sprayed weekly to stay HOA compliant, draped herself across what used to be my seat with the confidence of someone who'd never once been fined. She offered me a smile so thin it could slice bread. Isabel, she cooed. We really weren't expecting you after that little incident with the mailbox height last month. The words landed like separate slaps across the face. We weren't expecting you. I stood perfectly still while 12 pairs of eyes tracked me like I was the stray dog that had wandered into the country club. Some held pity, others curiosity. A few didn't bother hiding the smug satisfaction. The synchronized white lights reflected in the big windows behind them. Tiny explosions of fake cheer mocking the cold void spreading through my chest. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the small silver box no bigger than my palm, wrapped with the same precision my late father used to measure every fence post in this neighborhood when he founded the HOA 20 years ago. The room watched as I walked straight to the head table, heels clicking a steady rhythm that somehow sounded louder than Karen's endless meeting gavel. I set the box right beside Karen's plate of artisanal cheese that definitely came from the Community Beautification Fund, letting my fingers rest on it just long enough for the message to sink in. Check under your napkin when you're ready to face what you've actually done, I said, voice steady as steel. Karen's practiced smile faltered for the first time in years. What on earth? When you're ready to admit the rules you've been weaponizing, I cut in softly, open it. I turned without waiting, back ramrod straight, steps unhurried. No one called after me. No one followed. The only sound was the soft rustle of my coat as I pulled it back on and stepped into the snow that was falling harder now, big flakes drifting through the glow of the clubhouse porch light like silent witnesses. I sat in my car, knuckles white on the wheel, and finally let the full weight of their collective rejection hit me. 3 days earlier, I'd arrived early like I always had, hoping to help set up the way I'd done every holiday since Dad passed. The clubhouse was quiet, everyone still upstairs doing their hair and judging each other's outfits. I'd wandered into the storage room looking for the old folding tables Dad used to store there, and that's when I saw it, the first real crack in the perfect facade. Above the maintenance cabinet where Dad's old files had sat untouched for years, my name had been scratched off the donor plaque. My eyes moved to the new HOA Heroes wall Karen had installed last spring. The photo that used to show Dad and me rebuilding the community gazebo after the big storm now displayed Karen and her influencer pet posing in matching HOA-branded sweaters. When the board finally descended, Karen had given me the briefest of air kisses, the kind you give a distant relative you hope will leave soon. I watched silently as they moved around me like water around a rock in a riverbed. 2 months earlier, I'd driven up unannounced after a particularly nasty certified letter about my non-compliant holiday wreath. The house, my house, stood empty. Some magnetic pull had drawn me to Dad's old study in the back, preserved like a shrine. The locked file cabinet in the corner had called to me, and I remembered the key he'd shown me years before, hidden behind the loose brick in the fireplace. "Just in case, Izzy," he'd said with that quiet smile. What I found inside changed everything. Last week when I called Karen about the potluck contribution list, her voice had been ice cold and distracted. "Well, Isabel, we're doing things differently this year. Limited spots for contributors who actually follow the covenants, you understand?" Before I could answer, her husband's voice cut in on speaker. "Look, it's just easier this way. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." The same line I'd heard my entire life whenever something hurt too much to name. That's when I knew I'd be there. I'd spent the next week preparing the silver box, the evidence, the truth that would burn the whole house of cards down. Now, as I started the engine and glanced back at the clubhouse one last time, I could see them through the window, continuing their perfect potluck as if I'd never existed. My spot stayed empty, but not for long. I pulled away, snow crunching under the tires, and drove into the darkness, leaving behind the neighborhood that had chosen to erase me and the proof that would force them all to remember. I hung the last Christmas card on the thin ribbon strung across my apartment window in Seattle. 23 in total, from colleagues, clients, even the barista who remembered my oat milk latte order. The strings sagged under their weight, but held. Outside, the city disappeared behind a curtain of winter rain. 0 from Willow Creek. My fingers brushed the weathered leather portfolio hidden beneath a stack of marketing briefs. 3 days since the potluck, and I still hadn't returned it to the safety deposit box. Some evidence deserved to stay close. The leather still carried the faint scent of Dad's old study, pipe tobacco, and lemon polish. I unfastened the clasp, tracing the initials EM, as if touching his hand one last time. The notarized addendum to the HOA founding documents sat on top, crisp and formal. Below it, his letter rested in its envelope, corners soft from my repeated readings. I knew every word by heart, but needed to see his handwriting again, the places where the pen pressed harder when emotion broke through. "You never asked for anything, Izzy. You just stayed. You protected this community when the storms hit, and the rest of them ran for cover. The covenants were meant to serve people, not the other way around. I'm leaving you the original charter and every email trail. Use it only if they forget who built this place." The legal pages contradicted everything Karen had told the board for the last 2 years. The original rules Dad wrote allowed reasonable holiday decorations. The 3.5-inch grass was a suggestion, not a weapon. The $132,000 in the emergency reserve fund he'd earmarked for real storm repairs, not Karen's new patio furniture. A tear splashed onto the paper. I wiped it quickly, terrified of smudging his signature. Memories attacked again. How slowly it happened. Karen arriving at board meetings after Dad's stroke, staying longer each time. Her casual commandeering of the agenda for important enforcement issues. The other members yielding with relieved sighs, happy to let someone else carry the weight. "Karen's just so good with the details," they'd say, as if that excused everything. I remembered coming home from work to find my mailbox flag for being 1 inch too tall, while Karen's was wrapped in fairy lights that violated 3 separate color rules. Linda had explained with a tight smile, "You don't mind, do you?" Karen said it makes the street more cohesive. By the time Dad's confusion deepened, Karen had moved her influencer friend into the role of community liaison, the position Dad had always said was meant for me. Just temporarily, the board assured everyone. It makes more sense since you're not here most of the time. The worst part wasn't the fines or the public shaming on the HOA Facebook group. It was the photographs. One by one, images of Dad and me after the big 2018 storm. Us organizing volunteer chainsaws, rebuilding fences, hauling debris, disappeared from the clubhouse walls. Replaced by shots of Karen standing front and center while Dad sat confused in the background. My phone vibrated. Sarah, my assistant, didn't even wait for hello. "You're not working today, are you?" "Just organizing." I closed the portfolio. "Liar." Her voice softened. "You found something in your dad's files, didn't you? That's why you drove up for the potluck." In 3 years, Sarah had never pushed, but she'd been there the day Karen called to announce I'd been removed from the holiday planning committee without a vote. "They took everything," I whispered. Or tried to. "What are you going to do?" Before I could answer, another call buzzed through. Warren Clement, Dad's attorney and the only neutral party left on the original charter. "Call you back," I told Sarah. Warren's voice sounded older but steady. "Isabel, I've been trying to reach you. There's unusual activity on the HOA reserve account." "What kind?" Karen attempted to reallocate $20,000 for aesthetic upgrades to her own backyard. "They call me for verification because my name is still on the original filing." My stomach dropped. "Can she do that?" "Not without triggering the original bylaws your father wrote." "But she's trying." He paused. "There's more." Several board members called asking about amendments to the covenants. They seemed surprised when I mentioned your father's final intentions. A text notification flashed from Betty, our neighbor for 20 years. "Strange trucks at the clubhouse yesterday. Moving boxes out of the storage room. Should I be concerned?" I forwarded it to Warren. "Isabel, we need to meet tomorrow if possible." The next afternoon, Warren's office smelled of leather and old paper, unchanged since childhood visits with Dad. He slid documents across the desk, arthritis-swollen fingers tapping a highlighted paragraph. "Your father amended the charter 3 times in his last year. Each time he got more specific." He knew exactly what was coming, Izzy. Warren's eyes met mine. "Karen sent an email to the entire neighborhood claiming you abandoned the community during the last storm cleanup." My voice caught. That I wasn't there when it mattered. Warren handed me another document, a calendar with my volunteer hours marked in Dad's shaky handwriting. Every weekend, sometimes midweek, notes about what we fixed, who we helped, conversations we had. And this, a sealed envelope with my name. "He asked me to give you this if there was ever any question about his intentions." Inside, a single photo, Dad and me on his 70th birthday, rebuilding the community gazebo. His arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing. On the back, his handwriting, the only one who never left. "Can they fight this?" I asked. Warren shook his head. "Not successfully, but they'll try." He slid the final document toward me. "This secures everything legally. Your signature here makes it official." As I signed, I thought of the neighborhood gathered around their perfect potluck tables without me. "They think they've won," I said, capping the pen. Warren's smile was small but fierce. "They have no idea what's coming." Next morning, my phone buzzed for the 3rd time before I'd even finished my coffee. Karen again. I let it ring through to voicemail, placing the phone screen down on the kitchen counter while I poured another cup. The red notification light blinked like an accusation. When silence returned, I pressed play, holding the phone at arm's length as if her voice might contaminate the air. "Isabel, this community has responsibilities you clearly don't understand." That familiar patronizing tone she'd perfected after Dad's stroke. "The board is upset. Call me back so we can discuss what your father would have wanted for Willow Creek." I deleted it without saving, adding it to the growing collection of Karen's manipulations filling my voicemail over the past week. What Dad would have wanted. As if Karen had any clue. The mail arrived with a soft thud. Christmas cards cascaded onto the floor, bright rectangles of forced cheer. Most from colleagues, but three bore handwriting I recognized. Linda, the influencer, and Karen's husband. I opened them one by one, stomach tightening. We miss your contributions at community events. Karen says you've been struggling with compliance lately. Sometimes we have to set aside differences for neighborhood harmony. Your father valued rules above all else. Remember his example. I stacked them neatly beside the thick manila envelope that had arrived yesterday. More letters from residents, each dripping with concern and gentle reprimands clearly dictated by Karen's version of events. My laptop glowed with notifications. The influencer had posted another round of photos, her decorating the clubhouse tree, hand on Karen's shoulder, sitting in Dad's old folding chair by the fireplace. Caption, carrying on the Willow Creek traditions. Blessed to be here. Community first. The coffee turned bitter on my tongue. My phone rang again. Linda this time. I silenced it mid-ring. Not today, I whispered to the empty apartment. I grabbed my keys and drove across town to the storage unit I'd kept since moving to Seattle. The metal door groaned upward, revealing stacked boxes marked in Dad's careful handwriting. I navigated past old furniture to the back corner where his workbench tools waited, wrapped in blankets. The hammer felt solid in my hand, wooden handle worn smooth from years of use. I unwrapped each tool slowly, the level with its slightly bubbled glass, the hand plane with Dad's initials scratched into the metal, the tape measure with faded numbers. A memory surfaced bright and immediate. I'm 14, holding board steady while Dad measures. The community fence had collapsed in a winter storm, and rebuilding it became our weekend project. Neighbors offered help, but Dad refused. This is ours, Izzy, he'd said, showing me how to level each post. Karen had watched from her window, rolling her eyes at our dusty clothes. You know, we could hire professionals, she called when we finally came inside. Normal neighborhoods don't build their own fences. Dad had looked at her, something sad flickering across his face. Some things are worth doing yourself, Karen. Later, as we mixed concrete for the last post, Dad placed a hammer in my hands. It's not about who makes the most noise, Izzy. It's about who builds things that last. Years later, I pressed my forehead against the smooth wood, breathing in the faint sawdust scent that somehow still clung. I remember, Dad, I whispered. I remember everything. I packed the tools carefully and loaded the box into my car. The weight felt like armor against the storm of texts and calls trying to drag me back into their narrative. 3 days later, I spotted the influencer across the produce section at the local market. I considered abandoning my cart, but Dad's voice stopped me. Some things are worth doing yourself. She noticed me by the apples, face arranging into practiced concern. Isabel, we've all been so worried. She moved toward me, arms outstretched. I stayed still, watching her arms slowly lower. I'm perfectly fine, I said, selecting an apple and placing it in my basket. I'm sure you've made yourself quite comfortable in my absence. Her eyes narrowed, the mask slipping. You left the community, Isabel. We stayed. That's what matters. So does the truth, I replied, meeting her gaze. And it always finds its way home. She flinched just enough to confirm what I already knew. They were terrified of what I'd found. That evening, Warren called with updates. The paperwork is filed. Legally, they can't touch the reserve fund or amend the covenants without triggering massive consequences. Sarah stopped by with dinner and helped organize the final pieces, emails, bank statements, photos spread across my table. Karen is a real piece of work, she said, slipping another document into a folder. These withdrawals all coincided with her new patio installation. Betty texted photos of strange trucks at the clubhouse moving boxes I recognized from Dad's storage. Douglas, Dad's oldest friend, left a voicemail. Your father spoke of you with pride. He told me once you were the only one who saw the community, not what it could give. The contrast hit hard. My circle of real support versus the neighbors who'd chosen to erase me. Next week, I drove to the cemetery. Ground hard with frost. I placed a small arrangement of holly and pine cones we used to gather together. They won't erase you from my story, Dad. Or me from yours. Standing there with winter sun breaking through bare branches, clarity settled. The hammer, the fence, the quiet lessons while Karen was busy elsewhere. Those were the real inheritance, not the house or the fun they were so desperate to control. Back at the hotel, I prepared with methodical care. Documents copied. Most damning evidence in chronological order. The photograph that would hurt them most, Dad and me on the porch swing. I chose my clothes carefully. Simple black coat, Dad's watch on my wrist, nothing flashy. The silver box sat waiting. Inside, everything they feared. My phone buzzed with Sarah's text. You don't have to do this alone. But I did. This moment belonged to me and the promises I'd made at the graveside. As I drove toward the clubhouse for the emergency clarification meeting Karen had called, I rehearsed what I wouldn't say, what anger I'd contain. This wasn't confrontation. It was truth. I parked in the cul-de-sac, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the cold. Through the window, I could see them gathered, glasses raised in some toast I wasn't part of. The door opened silently. The room fell quiet as I appeared in the doorway, silver box tucked under my arm. Karen's face paled. Isabel, we weren't expecting, I know, I said, voice steady in the sudden silence. But some things can't stay buried forever. I placed the box on the head table, all eyes following the movement like it was a live grenade. No one spoke. No one moved. In that frozen moment, I finally understood what Dad meant about building things that last. Karen recovered first, her voice syrupy sweet with an edge of panic. Isabel, darling, this is hardly the time or place for personal grievances. We have a community to run. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Then let's run it by the original rules Dad wrote, the ones you've been rewriting in secret. I opened the box slowly, pulling out the first document. Bank statements showing $23,000 funneled from the emergency reserve into Karen's personal PayPal for aesthetic consulting fees. Gasps rippled through the room like a wave. Karen's husband tried to laugh it off. That's just a bookkeeping error. Everyone knows, I interrupted, voice still calm. Because I have emails where Karen instructed the treasurer to label it landscaping while she posted Instagram stories about her new hot tub. I laid the printed emails beside the statements, timestamps glowing under the twinkling lights. The influencer's face drained of color. Linda shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I kept going, pulling out the color-coded calendar of my volunteer hours, 142 documented shifts during the last 3 storms while Karen was on vacation in Cabo. How many did you log, Karen? I asked softly. Her mouth opened, closed. No sound. Next came the voice recorder Dad had left me, the one he'd used to document every board meeting when his health started failing. I pressed play. Dad's voice filled the room, clear and steady despite the tremor. Karen, I'm telling you now with full clarity of mind, the covenants are not your personal weapon. Isabel stays on every committee. The reserve fund is for real emergencies, not your patio. I see what you're doing with the minutes, changing my words after I leave. The recording continued with Karen's own voice, caught on tape. Marshall, you're confused. The community needs strong leadership. Isabel's too soft. We'll handle it quietly. The room erupted. Chairs scraped. Someone actually dropped their plastic goblet. Karen's face turned the exact shade of the forbidden red lights she'd find Mrs. Thompson, $500 for last December. You can't prove any of this, she shrieked, the polite mask shattering like cheap tinsel. This is a witch hunt. I've only ever done what's best for Willow Creek. I slid the final document across the table. The original charter with Dad's notarized addendum explicitly naming me as successor trustee if the board ever violated the founding principles. Actually, I said, I can. And Warren is outside with the sheriff's deputy who specializes in nonprofit fraud. The door opened on cue. Warren stepped in carrying the thick folder, deputy right behind him looking bored but official. Karen's husband tried one last desperate swing. We can split the fund fairly. 50-50? That's reasonable, isn't it? I gathered the documents back in a box. This was never about money, Karen. It never was. It was about who actually stayed when the community needed them. The influencer stood up so fast her chair toppled. I don't have to listen to this. Actually, you do, Warren said quietly. Since you've been living in a house whose mailbox height violation was waived only because you're Karen's favorite. She left without another word, face burning. Karen collapsed in her seat, genuine panic replacing the performative concern she'd worn for years. Her desperation filled the room as she leaned forward. Isabel, please. We can amend the rules. Make everything right. I stood, suddenly towering over the table in a way the power shift made physical. You had 2 years to make it right. Instead, you chose to erase the one person who remembered what this neighborhood was built for. I tucked the box under my arm. The deputy stepped forward. Ma'am, we're going to need to see those financial records. Karen's shoulders sagged. The Queen of Rules had finally run out of clauses. I walked toward the door, steps unhurried. No one followed. No one called my name. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, delicate flakes catching in my hair. I took a deep breath of sharp winter air and felt it cut through the heaviness in my chest. In the car, I placed my hand on the small velvet box on the passenger seat. The final revelation I'd chosen not to use today. Papers establishing a community trust in Dad's name that would ensure every resident, including Karen's family, would never want for real emergency help. Some truths weren't weapons. Some were seeds. I started the engine and drove away from the clubhouse, from a neighborhood that had tried to write me out of its story. This time, I was the one holding the pen. I placed Dad's faded holly mug at the empty chair, fingers lingering on its chipped handle. 6 months had passed since I walked out of that perfect Christmas nightmare, and the world hadn't ended. If anything, it had expanded. Morning light spilled across my Seattle apartment, catching the brass edge of Dad's photograph. Not the formal one Karen had insisted on at the memorial, but the candid one Betty sent me. Dad in his workshop, hammer raised mid-swing, laughing at something I'd said off camera. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Can we meet just once, please? I set it aside without answering. Not a rejection, just a postponement. Some conversations required perfect timing. The drive to what was now legally my childhood neighborhood took exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. I'd made the trip 12 times since winter. Each visit easier than the last. The house no longer loomed like an accusation. Today it waited like a blank canvas. The memory oasis, I said aloud, testing the name Warren had helped me file for the new community center. His paperwork for the rest of the reserve fund sat completed on the passenger seat. Dad's $132,000 diverted to real storm preparedness and dementia research rather than Karen's boat fund. I walked through rooms that once trapped decades of perfect performances, heels striking confident rhythms against hardwood that belonged to the community again. In the kitchen, I ran my hand along countertops where Karen had once orchestrated her military precision potlucks. My phone chimed with a message from Betty. Found something you should see. The attachment opened to a photograph I thought lost forever. Dad and me at 14, covered in sawdust, grinning beside the newly completed community fence. What caught my breath wasn't the image itself, but where Betty found it, thumbtacked above Dad's workbench in the tool shed, the one place no one had bothered to sanitize after he died. The one place he kept what truly mattered. Evening found me in the new garden behind the clubhouse, surrounded by my chosen family. Sarah topped off wine glasses while Warren discussed the nature sanctuary plan for the back acreage. Betty and Douglas raised their glasses as I placed Dad's hammer in the center of the table. To building things that last, Douglas said. Across town, a young single mom named Claire met me for coffee weekly, her eyes slowly losing the haunted look they'd carried when she first described Karen's campaign of selective fines that almost cost her the house. Your worth isn't measured by their recognition, I told her, echoing Dad's wisdom. 1 year later, Christmas lights twinkled against fresh snow as I set the table with Dad's collection of mismatched ornaments. No perfect centerpiece, No color-coordinated place settings, just chairs filled with people who chose to be here. Linda paused in the doorway, uncertainty etched in new lines around her eyes. "Your place is there," I said, pointing to the chair I'd saved for her. Not forgiveness exactly, but possibility. As I took my seat at the head of the table, I realized the true inheritance wasn't property or money. It was the proof I was always enough, even when they tried to write me out of their story. I raised my glass toward Dad's empty chair, his holly mug catching the light. Some things can never be erased. And somewhere across town, in a much smaller house with a lawn that was finally allowed to grow whatever length it wanted, Karen Ellison was learning the same lesson the hard way, that the loudest voice in a room isn't always the one that builds things that last. The neighborhood was healing. The rules were fair again. And for the first time in years, Willow Creek felt like home.